I have lots of notes on it.
Good afternoon. It is November 25th. This is the Administrative Committee of the Moscow City Council. Welcome all. To my left is Catherine Bonzo, and to my right is Art Bedke. I am Gina Terusio. Our first item is the approval of the September 23rd, 2019 Administrative Committee minutes.
They look fine to me.
I was in the audience, they looked fine to me, too.
They look good to me, too. Okay, our next item is the approval of the November 11th, 2019 Admin Committee minutes.
And they were fine.
And I wasn't here, but they looked fine.
They look fine to me, too. Okay, so both of those are approved, Mr. Reedner. Professional service, our next item is professional services agreement for construction engineering and inspection on the A Street Stage 2 Federal Aid Project. Mr. Bontrager. Hello.
Good afternoon. So before you is the professional service agreement for the consultant engineering inspection for this project. We've already gone through the bid process. The contractor's been awarded by ATD. What happened with this one is then they went out for RFQ to get qualifications for different consultants to do the construction engineering inspection on the project. They ended up getting a bunch of people responded to that. We evaluated it along with some LTAC representatives, came up with the company that we believe was best suited for it, following all the stuff. Then we met with LTAC and Civil Science, which was the company that was selected. We met with them a couple weeks ago down in Boise, negotiated the contract. With that, we had a couple different perspectives on what the overall value should be. Came to an agreement that $637,182 was the value that was agreed upon, which is roughly 16% of the construction agreement, which is pretty typical with a project of this size.
Okay.
And then the construction agreement itself is a standard ITD format for their professional service agreements.
Okay.
Any contingencies if there's an overrun on the project? Something
Yeah,
gets hung up?
so for the budget for this particular portion of it is still $766,000. So there's quite a bit of extra money, and it's not being swept away. So it'll be open available for either construction engineering inspection or even construction itself. Plus, there's also all kinds of other contingency money still in there as well. This is a large, nearly $4 million project, so.
I have a question. Yeah. It's in the document, and I know it's standard, but it's my first document, so it's page 2 of 13, Roman numeral 2, standards of performance. My questions mostly had to do with the subcontractors, and so I didn't understand. It shows how they're paid and all that kind of stuff, but there were some questions I had, like, how are they chosen? And I guess the contractors, or they pay them out of what they get?
Yeah, the main consultant does pay them out of what they'd receive.
And how many sub-consultants can you have?
They can, I believe, have many. They only have one to do the material inspection for this particular project, which the consultants themselves would probably want to have the least amount as possible, so they have, the most profit to themselves.
Okay, and then I was reading in that section too that we're looking at standards of performance, and it talks about the inspection updates, and it's going to be. It says will identify and recommend corrections, blah, blah, blah. And then it also says that they're responsible for checking it, but I was wondering, is there a responsibility for them to come back to the city, or do they just report to engineering so that we know what's going on? I just didn't read it, and I don't know where it is.
Sure, the whole process is actually administered by LTAC and ITD, but the city is involved in the whole time. So if there's any other major decisions that are necessary, it'll come back to the city.
So then we'll get monthly updates or quarterly? Like, this says there's updates, but it doesn't say when they are. Do we get those to know what's going on? I think it's mostly just because of because the project's so large, just to understand the parts and what's been completed and checked off and what's going on next. I think that's helpful. I think especially representatives have to answer questions because it's going to be out there for a while. So that's mostly what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I don't believe there's a set schedule for reporting back, but I mean, we can
Mr. Reader?
The city will be invited to all the weekly project meetings, so our staff will be advised at the progress. However, the city, or the council would like to be updated. I think one of our processes that we're implementing with our reorganization and budgeting process is that there will be regular reports to the council on status of construction projects and projects that are in process. So we can certainly do that as often as the council would like. I would suspect at Public Works Finance, at least once a month, you'll get an update. At least that's the impression that I'm getting.
Because you're going to weekly meetings, so once a month would be fine.
Staff is.
Yeah, and that's weekly meetings for this particular project. When we talk about status updates, I mean, I'm assuming we're talking about multiple projects.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to add a layer up to your workload. Mostly what I'm trying to do is make sure the council's informed on those,
Yeah.
the updates.
Yeah, I meant to say quarterly as well, not monthly. Monthly for all the projects would be a
Yeah.
bunch. What we'll also do is we inform on our website who to contact on projects. So if a member of the public has a question about when's A Street going to open up, what's going on here, then they can call and the city can either answer the question if we know, or they can steer them to the state whose project it is. It's for the benefit of our citizens, but, and we have a lot to say about it, but it is a state-administered project.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, and it also was in Part 8, the monthly progress report, and so that's the part where you're gonna go, and then you'll give information to administration will, or you'll present at Public Works and Finance, and then it'll go forward from there? Okay,
But that's quarterly, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so not monthly like it says there.
but you'll be going monthly?
Yes. Yeah, I'll be informed of what's going on a weekly basis.
Yeah, okay. And then you were saying Public Works and Finance is quarterly?
Yeah. Mr. Belknap and I have not figured out what the
That's-
schedule will be, but when one is done, as you recall, part of the process with the master agreements and that sort of thing was to have the council appropriate monies for projects, approve projects, then put it into a managerial administrative process. Once you have a master agreement, task orders can be utilized to mobilize and come to agreement with consultants. Then the project proceeds and council is advised as to the progress within the appropriated money and the schedule that we said we'd get it done within. So it's a way to keep everybody informed.
Yeah, that's just, and because it's not in their document, I didn't know, you just fit the piece of that other piece, of how we get informed. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Any other questions? Okay, so, Art, how about you recommend approval of the agreement and forward to council with recommendation to authorize the mayor's signature?
I think we should do exactly that, and given the expenditure, regular agenda.
Yeah, regular
Agreed.
agenda for sure.
That'll be fun.
All right, thank you.
Awesome.
You can come
Thank
back
you.
and party again.
Sure.
Okay, our next item is the ordinance amending Title 4, Chapter 6 regarding covered parking space requirements and miniature golf parking requirements. Mike?
Favorite topic.
This is an exciting topic.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I'm here to brief the committee on a couple ordinances that are going to be before City Council next Monday, December 2nd. And the first one, and Planning and Zoning Commission have been working on both of these over the course of the last couple months. And the first one is pertaining to covered parking and mini golf facilities. So currently, this was one of the items within our off-street parking standards. We've been eyeing at taking a look at removing for some time now. It's really unique to Moscow. There's not a whole lot of other municipalities that have a requirement that you designate a covered parking space. So this just only applies to single-family and two-family dwellings in R1 zones, which are low-density, single-family residential. We require either 2 parking spaces be provided in a garage or carport or reserved so that at a future date they could be covered. So what that means is that they meet setback requirements, so they could be covered in the future. And then all other residential zones that allow single-family and two-family dwellings, we require at least 1 of those spaces to be covered or located at a future date that it could be covered. So, you know, like I mentioned, this is unique to Moscow. There are a few projects this has presented some challenges to. And mainly it's just, taking a look at designating those on the site plan. Really, we're just concerned with providing off-street parking, not necessarily whether or not it's covered or not. So we'd be looking at removing this component of the off-street parking standard, so just striking that language, but keeping all the other required parking the same. And then over the course of the last couple months, we've been dealing with a business that's looking at locating here in the city and providing miniature golf facilities. And just looking through our off-street parking standards, it was discovered that currently miniature golf facilities have the same parking requirement as regular golf courses and country clubs. And I think this was just a result of when we redid the table as part of the use table amendment. It was just carried over from just golf courses, and we didn't do a whole lot of research as to what the requirement should be. It wasn't, or we didn't think it was going to be a hot burning use that was going to be, coming to Moscow. But now that we're presented with a opportunity, we're just reviewing the calculation, and staff had just gone through about a dozen other municipalities, and most of them ranged from 1 space per hole to 1.5 spaces per hole, which was substantially less than the 4 per hole. So we were just planning on changing that and modifying it to, instead of 4 per hole, to 1 per hole. And so that's really the gist of the off-street parking changes. And like I mentioned before, that's going to council next Monday, December 2nd. And staff's recommending forwarding that for public hearing.
For clarification, on the single-family residential off-street parking, does that still include language relative to setbacks and issues like that in case they want to, in the future, enclose it?
We would, end up striking that whole language. So they would just need to meet off-street parking requirements. So it still needs to be on private property, but it doesn't necessarily need to be in a location where it could be covered in the future. That's really the property owner's discretion and whether or not they want to cover it.
So-
A lot of the times what we deal with is, as you know, people have garages and then use them as storage for other things, not necessarily their vehicles. So, we would not require them to reserve that on the property. There have been a number of modifications to our code over the years. One was just a reduction in the setback requirements for accessory structures 200 square feet or less in size. So those can go right up to the rear and side property lines. And so you could build a 20 by 10 garage, single car garage, and you wouldn't have any setback requirements except for the front setback. And so that's really alleviated a lot of the concerns as far as people, having to fit garages or carports on their properties. And so we haven't really, seen it as too big of an issue over the years since that was amended.
Builder or homeowner, if they want to paint themselves into that corner, they can go right ahead.
Certainly their prerogative, certainly.
Do you have any questions, Catherine?
No, I'm good on this one.
Okay. Seems like we are all in favor of recommending forwarding the proposed ordinance for public hearing at the city council meeting on December 2nd.
Perfect.
Thank you. Now we have another one. Ordinance amending Title 4, Chapter 3 regarding accessory dwelling unit minimum lot size and utility requirements. Mike?
Thank you. So just to give you a little bit of background on the ADU ordinance that was approved April 6, 2015, ended up allowing ADUs in all residential zones. There are certain requirements. They have to meet the minimum lot size in their zone to be eligible for an ADU. And then the development standards, we restrict the size just to keep them accessory to the principal structure on the property. We want a ratio that's similar to an accessory structure, so we're limiting them to 600 square feet in size or 40% of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling, whichever is less. We limit the occupancy of ADUs to 2 occupants. And we require the owner to live either in the ADU or the principal dwelling on the property. And we require 1 off-street parking space for the ADU, and that's in addition to the 2 that are required for the single-family dwelling. And since 2015, we've permitted 8 ADUs. So there definitely has not been a proliferation as, going through the process. There was some concern from some residents that We were going to get these just all over town, and it was going to be compromising single-family zones, which hasn't been the case. We have had numerous inquiries regarding people looking at ADUs that didn't meet the minimum lot size, and so they were ineligible to receive an ADU on their property. And most of these are in, Fort Russell, the kind of the grid networked neighborhoods that are more traditional and closer to the city core, where we're trying to promote this attractive density. And looking at a goal of comp plan has been to promote a variety of housing types while preserving neighborhood character. Also provides affordable housing opportunities and preserves the really just the neighborhoods themselves. So we did an analysis looking at all the non-conforming lots within these areas. Now, usually when you go past Mountain View, you don't run into too many issues because those were all developed. We haven't really changed the lot size requirements for, say, the R2 zone, which is 7,000 square feet. But you have a lot of lots that are, like I said, in the core of town that predated a lot of our zoning ordinances. So I think the first zoning ordinance was in the 1940s. A lot of these areas, so this would be like the Park Edition, ends up doing kind of a, dog bone shape. Ends up extending through East City Park. But those, were platted in the late 1800s, and so, predated a lot of the zoning ordinances, and so we end up with these non-conforming lot sizes. And you can see all the ones surrounding East City Park there. And taking a look at the zoning configuration, in these older areas of town, you can be driving down the street, and the composition of just the mixture of housing types is similar, even though you're going across different zoning districts. I mean, you don't know that you're going across different zoning districts when you do. So you can see this lighter yellow. This is the R4 zone. Transitions to the R3 zone, which allows duplexes, twin homes, and townhouses. And then it ends up transitioning to an R2 zone, which only allows single-family dwellings. But once again, this is traditional neighborhoods. A lot of these lots are alley accessed. So just a closer view, all the red represents the lots that are non-conforming in size, and so you can see just the concentration of those surrounding East City Park. You run into scenarios where this property owner is allowed an ADU, but you go right down the block and, this may be 200 square feet larger than the rest of them, and it just so happens that it meets the minimum lot size. And so they're eligible for an ADU, but all their neighbors are not because they don't meet the minimum lot size. And looking at the subdivision, we had a minimum, I think at one point in time, of 6,250 square feet. So these are not too far off of the 7,000 minimum lot size. But that's kind of a snapshot of the nonconformities. And then I wanted to go back, just touch briefly on the citizen survey questions that we asked, Planning and Zoning Commission asked prior to allowing ADUs. And so just highlighting, would you support ADUs in your neighborhood? And I think this really just represents what we've seen ever since they were adopted. So everybody seems to support ADUs in their neighborhood. You've got 38% agree, 25% strongly agree, very few percentage disagree or strongly disagree. And then taking a look at whether or not you would likely add an ADU to your property, well, a lot of people are, maybe at some point in the future where maybe their scenario conditions changed in their lives, maybe they were looking at, maybe they had an infirm family member, child that ended up going to college and coming back and living with them, or just maybe some additional income. And, but yeah, it's, people aren't knocking down the door of our office to permit ADUs, but they don't really have an issue with other people in their neighborhood having them. And then we broke this down by citizen survey sector, taking a look at strongly agree to question of supporting ADUs in the neighborhood. And then this one was strongly disagree to the question of supporting. So, really low percentage as far as, really not having an issue with ADUs in their neighborhood. And then strongly agree to the question of likely add an accessory dwelling unit. So once again, it's pretty low percentages of the people that are actually interested in adding one. And then we looked at the common elements, and so this really pretty much directed the design standards that we ended up with. So design was kind of low, location of entrances was low as well, but people were more concerned with owner occupancy, being a college town, off-street parking, maximum occupancy, and maximum size. And so that really educated us on what design standards should be incorporated, and those are the ones we ended up incorporating. So, one last look at all the non-conforming lots. And based upon kind of this analysis and discussing, what we viewed over the last 4 or 5 years, and P&Z looking at this, we would recommend removing the minimum lot size eligibility requirement from the ordinance to open up ADUs to all those non-conforming lots in town. So that would be one modification. And then just an ancillary one, we have a requirement that all accessory structures, so uses, buildings, and structures that utilize electricity and or water and are accessory to single-family or duplex residents, have to be served from the same electrical and or water meter. And so that's really to control, kind of the future use. You see some scenarios where there's a larger shop building built in a residential zone, it gets separately metered. That has a tendency to start moving in the commercial direction sometimes and being rented out separately. So it's just a level of control that we like to have on accessory structures, but ADUs are really intended to be separate structures, and we've run into issues recently where people are looking at potentially having to upgrade the panel or upgrade the service to their house. I mean, there comes a point where all of a sudden you have 2 separate dwellings that are being serviced off of one panel and one electrical service. And it's just presented some challenges with older houses and having to upgrade those at a substantial cost. And we really see no reason why they wouldn't be able to have separate electrical or water meters on the ADUs if they so choose. And so we would be just adding that addition on there just to exclude accessory dwelling units from that limitation that they be serviced off the main dwelling. So that's really the gist of those changes. And like I mentioned before, this is going to council next Monday, and certainly being able to answer any questions you might have.
Art?
Yeah, relative to the separate water service, does that involve any complications relative to billing for sewer service?
Well, as far as sewer service, no. So usually they would not have a separate sewer connection unless they wanted a separate sewer connection and they wanted to pay the general facilities charges. Usually we just charge them a different rate. So I think it's like a multifamily rate on the sewer, but it's just charged to the main dwelling. So we've got that all figured out.
So there is an adjustment in the billing for sewer use?
There's already an adjustment that we see when people add ADUs to the property, and that won't change. People will just have the option of, say, another water meter. So if they want another water meter, they would still need to pay the GFC charges and obviously the water meter cost.
Yep.
So there's probably circumstances where they'll just want to run it off the main house. But electrical is really the big one, where they want separate electrical service, so.
Catherine?
Well, it's really interesting to see how much this supports the Palouse housing assessment. Information that's in there, even the layout of the non-conforming units and stuff. But I was curious at how many respondents were there on the survey that the pie charts were from? Which one was that from? I couldn't remember.
That was the 2014 citizen survey, I believe.
Citizen survey, yeah.
So we
Okay.
send that out to 1,200 random selected residents, and, that they're technically valid.
Yeah.
Usually we get in excess of 300.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to see how well that sits. And then you said there were 8 that have been,
8 that have been permitted. We have one right now that's in review. And
where did they end up?
all over. It's interesting. I mean, we have a number of them in older areas where people have just added those onto a garage. It really just accommodates them really well in those traditional neighborhoods because they have alley access, and they usually have accessory buildings that are right up to the alley, and so it's pretty convenient. And we've also seen, oddly enough, quite a few in some of the newer subdivisions, so some of the newer homes that have unfinished basements, You know, you have really larger square footages of the homes in like Victoria and Conestoga and Rolling Hills. And so you have these larger homes, and it really just accommodates ADUs really well because they usually have daylight basements that come off the back. You know, you already kind of have a separate entrance back there, and you just a lot of times have unused space, or it's maybe just additional living space that they'd like to create one out of the daylight basement. Just a portion of it usually, not the
Yeah.
whole entire footprint.
I
But
didn't realize that was considered part of the definition. That's really interesting.
yeah, it doesn't have to be
That's cool.
detached.
Yeah.
It could be attached as well. You know, it could be included within the main dwelling also.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I know how much thought's been going into trying to figure out how to infill and make more affordable housing options, and so it's great that planning and zoning and with your guidance and with PEPs and all the assortment of information that's come forward, we're finally seeing a little bit of movement.
Yep.
So I hope like you that we see more. Yeah,
so do I.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it was surprising that we were only averaging about 2 a year,
yeah.
given the amount of interest it seemed before we passed the ordinance. But, you know, like I mentioned, we get probably a couple a year that are looking at creating them on non-conforming lots, and they just can't. So this will open it up to hopefully some more.
Yeah, when we first started the thing, we always left it open for modification as time went on after we observed how things were working out, and I think this represents one of the first modifications that's necessary to what we started with. Started out pretty good, and
Yeah.
nothing's perfect out the gate.
Mr. Reedner?
So, Mike, was there discussion at P and Z? If you go back to where you had the different colors for the lots? Go back one more, keep going, keep going, keep going.
Like the zoning one?
Yeah, I believe it is a zoning one. Okay, so go back to that first one. If you look, the next one that you just passed,
This one?
okay, if you look right off of Howard Street, about one block off Third, less than one block, there's a very narrow lot there. Did P and Z talk about, did they consider that there would ever be a lot that was so small that it couldn't allow an ADU?
We did a little bit, yeah. You know, Brandy was part of that conversation as well, and where she lives in Fort Russell, there's like a really small lot. I mean, like 2,500, 3,000 square feet in size. And, you know, what would control that is really just the design standards as far as off-street parking. So, I mean, that would be the challenge. You know, if it got so small, you wouldn't, you know, likely wouldn't be able to fit the off-street parking on site. And that would control maybe too much,
Okay,
you know, on one piece of property. And so it was discussed.
okay, thanks.
Did you have something that you wanted to add before I?
I did. I was just going to comment that I think you know, what we've seen are the design standards are really solid. It was just you know, one minor tweak, and I think that just represents the good work P&Z put in over the years to develop those standards, and the council approving them as well. So.
I'm really encouraged by it. I think the housing study for me brought a lot of sunshine to the fact that Moscow has really started already some of these affordable housing or attainable housing measures. I was kind of proud of us, and I like that we're potentially going to change this. So I'm hearing that we would like to recommend forwarding the proposed ordinance for public hearing at the council meeting on December 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mike?
That is the end of our regular agenda. I do believe Megan Cherry's here to talk to us about the finalist proposals for the public art project at Sea and Main. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Great, thank you. It's great to be here, and I'm really excited to share news about Sea and Main today. So just wanted to update about where we are in the project. We've got 3 finalists at this point, and wanted to share just where we are in the timeline. This timeline goes back a little ways in terms of what we've already done. So our call to artists was open May through the end of July. We received 12 applications. In that open call, we were requesting qualifications only. We weren't requesting site-specific designs. Which is something that's become standard in the public art industry, or is becoming more and more standard, to ask artists for qualifications and then to later choose 3 finalists or a certain number of finalists to be paid for their site-specific design work. So that's the model we followed. So the first round of selection was in August and September, and the selection panel identified, through that process, identified three finalists. We checked references, did a lot of due diligence. It was a really pretty incredible selection panel. I wanted to share that. It was a great group of people, and everybody looked very carefully at each of the applicants. And so through that process, we identified 3 finalists who then spent the month of October creating site-specific proposals. Those were presented to the selection panel in person here in the council chambers. And then after that point, we opened up for public comment, which is perhaps some promotion you've seen floating around town. We really tried to raise awareness for that opportunity for the public to comment. We received over 50 comments in the space of a very short period of time, both online and on the first floor of City Hall.
Good.
And I don't know if is it okay for me to hand you paper today? So I have the summary of those comments for everybody, if you would like to have those. You have one already, but.
We can hand those
Thank
off.
you.
I've already got
Here,
one.
Let's do that again. Thank you.
The last page is a
So,
good one.
DJ was so kind as to put this together for us. And essentially what we're seeing here is the comments verbatim as they came in. Some of them came in on paper, some of them came in online. And she's essentially organized them so that we can see those that are generally in favor of one project or another. And then on the last page, there are some more general comments that might be more about the value of public art or the philosophies guiding the implementation of public art. So I wanted to make sure that you had access to that information. And this summary is something that the selection panel saw before their final deliberation. So the selection panel didn't, we were very clear that they were able to use it as a point of reference, that the public's comments were important as that point of reference. So now the next point on the timeline, here we are today. Wanted to give this committee an update on the project, and then the intention is that the selection panel's recommendation will go to the Arts Commission on the 10th of December. And if all goes according to plan, then we'll be bringing their recommendation to council on the 16th. So in advance of that, I wanted to show you some of the finalists' work and tell you a little bit about it. Before I get to their design, sorry, one more photo of the sea and Main without any artwork. The finalists were asked to provide a site-specific design, but also a budget and production schedule, and a community engagement plan. That really was a strong wish of the Arts Commission and also the selection panel because of the experiences with Melissa Cole's piece at the library. And so we wanted to incorporate that as a standard practice for our public art projects, that we're asking the artists to put forward a plan and kept it fairly open-ended in terms of what they wanted to do. That they're invited to do what works best for their work. And then also we asked them to anticipate and put forward a plan for the maintenance needs for their artwork, which is something that is going to thread into our maintenance plan for the public art program as a whole. So all of those pieces, don't want to bury you in paperwork, but I do have all of that if you would care to have copies of it. I just wanted to have the information. So this is the first the finalists are, here, I'll just hand these around. The finalists are pairs. Jennifer Corio and Dave Fry are from Vancouver, Washington. Ken McCall does a lot of work with his partner, Jonna, and they're from Boise. Ken is both the fabricator and the designer. And then John Yarnell is, and this is Ken McCall's information. And then John Yarnell is the lead, the design lead at Trademark Design and Fabrication in Boise. And he sent one of his representatives to present their project. So what you're seeing here is all of that information that we asked them to put forward in terms of budget and production schedule.
And you didn't
Maintenance.
give them a budget?
What's that?
You didn't give them a budget?
We did, but we wanted to see how they were going to break that budget apart. So yes, we did give them a budget. The budget for this project is $40,000. So which, in recognition that in the grand scope of the business that we do at the city, that may seem like a small budget to do all of this, to do, but it's such a really important landmark piece. And public art is so much a part of the city's identity that we're careful to make sure we're following the process exactly right. So they were given a budget, but we asked them how they're going to break that out, and we were looking for some specific line items in their budget. Like we're adding some requirements, like they have to have all of their drawings stamped by an Idaho licensed engineer, and that's a first in our program. So
Just like you said with the maintenance, they included that as well, right?
yes,
Oh,
yeah. Just so we have a sense of, we're not asking artists to make things that don't require maintenance. That's unrealistic. Anything that we make in the world is going to need to be maintained. So we just want to know on the front end what's going to be required so that we can get it in our comprehensive maintenance plan. And so that we wanted to know about it on the front end. So in any case, our last finalist is John Yarnell from Trademark Fabrication and Design. Can't remember if I said that, but they're a design firm in Boise. This is the first design from Jennifer Corio and Dave Fry. We did make a note that all of these designs are conceptual in nature, meaning that if ITD or council determines that there's a challenge with material or just about anything, that we need to see this as conceptual in nature, and that some shifts may happen. Just to tell you a little bit about these artists' concept, you may remember that in the project description for this project, we talked a lot about homecoming, that this couplet, when you're arriving in Moscow from the north, there's this sense of having arrived in the city, and wanted to mark that space as a place of homecoming. One of the Arts Commission members also remarked how the homecoming parades and parades of all kinds line up in this location, and so really felt like that theme of homecoming was important. These artists took that on really as a pretty core part of their concept. So their idea was to use the birds as a way to describe the migratory approach to Moscow as a city where the students fly in, the students fly out, they roost, they leave for the summer, they come back in the fall, and so they wanted to use the birds as symbolic of that, and also to use the Palouse landscape as a foundation. As I look at this design, one other note I wanted to just remind everyone about is that the ITD has asked us to use this space very specifically to be careful around visibility for drivers. So we need to have our artwork up on poles. So the artwork has to start no closer to the ground than 10 feet. So, and that's 10 feet above the level of the road. So that's something, that's a common theme that you'll see in all of these design proposals. In terms of materials, this piece is, the poles are weathering steel, the other elements are stainless, or in the case of the colored panels, those are powder-coated aluminum. This, I'm not sure if that will play. That's not going to play. Let me see if I can make that happen.
You can do it.
So these artists provided us with a rendering that shows us, gives us a sense of what that piece will look like in the round. So it is occupying more of the space than I think that first rendering really shows. So that was important to see.
The birds are stationary on the one.
True, yeah.
Everything's stationary.
Everything is stationary. That was one of the requirements for this piece from ITD. Also, that we didn't want anything that was kinetic. Also, they were averse to the idea of anything shiny because we're driving in that area. So that's one way that these artists did tick the box with the poles being weathering steel, that there's no danger of that reflective surface. The next design, this is a design by Ken McCall. Ken is an artist in Boise, and he talked a lot about, in terms of color choices, he did talk about the beautiful sunrise and sunset that we see in this landscape. And then he also talked about his associations with the northern part of the state being about fur trapping and the tanning of hides, and so that sort of the picture of the image of the stretched hide was something that was important to him with this design. It's also worthy of note that we did steer artists away from, or we steered them towards sensitivity to athletic identities, rivalries, and so that is to say, in essence, please do not use blue and orange.
Darn straight.
Might as well say it out loud. So there we go. So this piece is constructed from, let me get this exactly right, I believe it is powder-coated aluminum, powder-coated steel, stainless. We've got stainless, the poles, the curved poles are stainless, and then the color pieces that you see are powder-coated aluminum.
And so the lowest arc would be 10 feet?
Not the lowest arc, but the lowest triangular piece that you see, that would be, yeah. Much conversation was had in the selection panel room about wanting to avoid climbability.
I know. So they're trying to put those triangles so that tight, so they wouldn't do that.
Right.
Is that
Right, and high enough so that it would not be practical to climb.
so trying to figure that
Given
out.
it's
Corner Club and all that.
Yeah.
some breweries there. So this is another view of that same design.
So just because I'm having trouble visualizing, so a scale with that lowest purple and orange one, that's at 10 feet?
Yes. From the grade of the road to
So
the bottom of that.
A person fits underneath that quite readily?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
Yes. Yeah, that's something that, and unfortunately, I'm sorry, I don't have, the artist did not provide a drawing with a person in there for scale. That would have been helpful, but it was a concern that the selection panel had to, but yes, a person would fit under that.
And I took down the dimensions of the triangle, so that is 30 by 25 by 40. That's what that's going to be,
The
where the art's going to be. So would that be that large?
In terms of the footprint that it takes up inside the artwork area.
Yeah.
You know what, I'm not seeing in his materials something
It'd be that big.
that's to scale that way, so we would need to see scaled drawings
Yeah.
and engineered drawings from him to know specifically how that's
Yeah,
gonna
because
work.
height then becomes, really,
Yeah,
really tall.
so I think we're probably, in reality, taking up a somewhat smaller footprint
Okay.
in that space.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and really, if you look at the setbacks in that, for that artwork area, there isn't that much space left inside that triangle that's usable.
Okay.
This is the third design by Trademark Design and Fabrication. This piece is one that I feel moved to talk about the artist's community engagement plan, because it's very much a part of their design. The other two artists plan to, or proposed that they would have artist talks and connect with the artist community, particularly the emerging artist community. In this case, the artists would like to connect with the Nez Perce tribe to create patterns to etch onto the acrylic panels. So the materials that you're seeing here are powder-coated steel with acrylic panels that are designed for this purpose, and their intent is to, like I said, work with the tribe to identify patterns that are appropriate for use in this location, and that was their way of both connecting with the project description and talking about homecoming and that idea of origin and home. But also that's their plan for community engagement. So that was something that was an idea that they put forward. And
Since you talked about setback, can you go back to the original one that shows the triangle that has the dimensions that I wrote down?
You
And
bet.
would you just give me a little bit more setback information?
yeah, so what we're seeing here is the actual artwork area, and this is from point to point on that triangle.
Right, so that's what I wrote
It's
down.
basically 40 feet by 25 and a half feet by 31. And that's specifically for, traffic, to make sure we're not getting in the way of traffic.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Happy to answer any other questions about design. Sorry to take up so much time here today.
No,
but
it's important.
It lasts a long time. It's
It lasts a long time. We're gonna,
So we have
it's
to-
gonna be in our
it's a
collection for a
deliberate
long time, so
process.
we want to make sure we get it
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
that's good. I'm glad to have the information on the artist. I think that's really helpful too.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, these are all very professional artists. These are all artists who are, who are seasoned, professional, public artists. And that I think that should probably inspire a lot of confidence. This is, none of their first rodeos, if that makes sense. It's,
2 from Boise and 1 from Vancouver?
yes.
Okay. Okay.
And they've already talked to the commission.
They have talked to the selection panel, but the commission has not seen a recommendation on this project yet.
So it's timed, so council is informed, committee is informed before it gets to commission.
So I don't have any questions. I was there on the selection committee, so
Oh,
my questions have all been answered.
Do you have any
He knows
additional?
everything about it.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I don't either. This will be interesting. So,
Thank you.
thank you, Megan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Megan.
Mr. Reedner, is there anything else?
Staff has nothing further for the committee.
Okay, awesome. Want to do a motion?
Sure, let's go.
All right, we're adjourned.